Damien Al-Rashid had promised his American bride Elena the honeymoon of a lifetime in Zanzibar's most exclusive resort. But as the sun rose over the pristine white beaches where their love story was supposed to begin, Elena's lifeless body would be discovered half buried in the sand, bearing the brutal marks of her husband's final betrayal. If cases like this shock you as much as they shock me, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest true crime investigations. Your support helps us bring justice to forgotten victims and expose the dark truths behind perfect facades. But let's go back to where it all began. The first time Elena Martinez saw Damien Al-Rashid, she was presenting her revolutionary sustainable housing design to a packed auditorium in Miami's most prestigious architectural conference. At 25, she had already earned recognition as one of America's most promising environmental architects, her innovative carbon-negative building concepts catching the attention of developers worldwide. Her presentation that humid April morning focused on luxury developments that could actually heal the environment rather than destroy it, a passion project that had consumed her thoughts for 3 years. As she clicked through detailed schematics showing how buildings could generate more energy than they consumed, she noticed a man in the front row leaning forward with intense concentration, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When she finished a thunderous applause, he was the first to approach the stage, moving through the crowd with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. His perfectly tailored navy suit couldn't hide the athletic build beneath, and when he smiled, introducing himself with a slight accent that made Elena's pulse quicken, she found herself captivated despite her usual wariness around charming strangers. "Your vision for sustainable luxury development is exactly what the Middle East needs," Damien said, extending his hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive. "I'm developing several properties in Dubai that could benefit from your revolutionary approach. Would you consider consulting on projects that could change how the world thinks about luxury and environmental responsibility?" Elena had heard similar propositions before from developers who wanted to appear environmentally conscious while changing nothing substantial about their practices. But something in Damien's intensity suggested genuine commitment to the ideals she'd spent her career fighting for. When he mentioned flying her to Dubai first class to tour his current projects and discuss potential collaboration, she surprised herself by saying yes before her practical mind could list all the reasons to decline. The decision felt impulsive and thrilling, so unlike her methodical approach to everything else in life. 3 days later, she found herself on Emirates Flight 77 to Dubai, texting her father, Professor Miguel Martinez, that she might have found the developer who could finally make her environmental dreams reality on a massive scale. Dubai overwhelmed Elena's senses from the moment she stepped off the plane into the air-conditioned luxury of the world's busiest international hub. Damien met her personally, eschewing the usual driver to escort her through customs with VIP efficiency. His black Lamborghini Aventador felt excessive until he explained it ran on sustainable biofuels, part of his commitment to reducing carbon footprints even in luxury transportation. As they drove through the gleaming city, past architectural marvels that seemed to defy physics and reason, Damien pointed out buildings his company had developed while sharing his vision for Dubai's sustainable future. "The old generation built to impress," he said as they passed the world's tallest building reaching impossibly into the cloudless sky. "My generation builds to last and heal. We can have luxury without destruction, beauty without waste." His penthouse apartment occupied 2 floors of the city's most exclusive tower, offering panoramic views of the Persian Gulf and downtown Dubai's spectacular skyline. But what impressed Elena most wasn't the obvious wealth, but the thoughtful environmental features integrated throughout the space. Solar panels disguised as decorative elements, gray water recycling systems, locally sourced sustainable materials that created warmth without ostentation. Their first dinner together stretched past midnight as they discovered shared passions for architecture, environmental protection, and classical literature. Damien quoted Rumi while describing his philosophy of building homes that nurtured both human souls and the natural world. Elena found herself opening up about her childhood in California, her architect mother who had died when Elena was 16, and how that loss had driven her toward creating buildings that could outlast human fragility. When he walked her to the guest suite he'd prepared, the goodnight kiss was inevitable, gentle, and electric with promise. Over the following week, their professional relationship evolved into something deeper and more intoxicating than either had anticipated. Damien showed her proposed development sites while explaining his commitment to preserving Dubai's delicate desert ecosystem. They visited his current projects, where Elena marveled at innovative cooling systems that reduced energy consumption by 60% and rooftop gardens that supported local wildlife. Each day brought new evidence that she'd finally found a developer who shared her values, someone who could help her change the world through architecture. When he proposed extending her visit indefinitely and offering her a position as sustainability director for his entire company, Elena called her father with excitement bubbling through her voice. "Dad, I think I've found what I've been searching for my entire career," she said during their nightly video call, Dubai's lights twinkling behind her like earthbound stars. Not just a job, but someone who understands that luxury and environmental responsibility aren't contradictions. Professor Martinez, who had raised Elena alone after her mother's death and worried constantly about his daughter's tendency to trust too easily, heard something in her voice that concerned him. The breathless quality, the way she seemed to float through their conversation, reminded him uncomfortably of his late wife during their early courtship, when passion had overwhelmed practical considerations. "Mija, you've known this man for 1 week," he said gently, choosing his words carefully to avoid triggering Elena's stubborn streak. "Perhaps you should return home and consider this opportunity more thoughtfully." But Elena was already mentally packing her life into shipping containers, already imagining the sustainable paradise she and Damien would build together in the desert. She didn't notice how her father's concern deepened with each conversation, or how Damien's romantic gestures grew more elaborate and possessive with each passing day, as if he were staking claim to something precious he refused to lose. Elena's decision to relocate permanently to Dubai happened with breathtaking speed that should have alarmed everyone who knew her methodical nature. Within 6 weeks of their first meeting, she had resigned from her prestigious position at Martinez Environmental Design, sold her Boston apartment, and shipped her belongings to Damien's penthouse, where he had cleared an entire floor to serve as her private architectural studio. The space was a designer's dream, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views, state-of-the-art computer systems, and a materials library stocked with sustainable building samples from around the world. "You need creative freedom to develop your revolutionary concepts," Damien explained as Elena marveled at the professional setup that had cost more than most people's annual salaries. No corporate bureaucracy, no budget constraints, just pure innovation. Her father's increasingly worried phone calls became easier to deflect when surrounded by such overwhelming evidence of Damien's commitment to her career and their shared environmental mission. The romantic gestures escalated with each passing week, each more elaborate and public than the last. Damien arranged for a rare orchid species to be flown from Costa Rica and planted in their private rooftop garden because Elena had mentioned loving the flowers during childhood trip. He commissioned a renowned artist to create a sculpture incorporating sustainable materials that represented their partnership between American innovation and Middle Eastern vision. When Elena's birthday approached in July, he surprised her with a helicopter tour of potential development sites while a string quartet played her favorite classical pieces through the aircraft sound system. Each gesture felt simultaneously romantic and slightly overwhelming, as if Damien were claiming ownership of her happiness through sheer financial force. Elena found herself documenting these moments obsessively on social media, partly because the experiences felt too incredible to be real, and partly because the constant photography provided distance from emotions that threatened to overwhelm her rational mind. Their professional collaboration initially exceeded Elena's wildest expectations, as Damien introduced her to investors, government officials, and international developers who seemed genuinely excited about implementing her sustainable luxury concepts. She found herself presenting to boardrooms filled with influential decision-makers who hung on her every word about carbon-negative construction and regenerative design principles. The first project they developed together was a luxury residential tower that would actually improve air quality in its immediate environment while providing ultra-high-end amenities for the world's wealthiest individuals. Elena threw herself into the work with passionate intensity, staying up until dawn perfecting designs that could prove luxury and environmental responsibility were not only compatible, but mutually reinforcing. Damien supported her dedication completely, often bringing her coffee and encouragement during late-night design sessions. Though she began noticing how he always knew exactly where she was and what she was working on without her mentioning specific details. The first subtle red flag appeared during a dinner with potential American investors who had flown to Dubai specifically to meet Elena and discuss bringing her concepts to projects in California and New York. Elena was explaining how her designs could reduce construction waste by 70% when one of the investors, a woman named Sarah Chun, who had followed Elena's career for years, asked pointed questions about the financial projections Damien had provided. "The numbers seem optimistic," Sarah said diplomatically, "especially considering current market conditions for luxury developments." Elena noticed Damien's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, though his smile never wavered as he smoothly redirected the conversation toward Elena's technical innovations rather than economic realities. Later that night, as they reviewed how the dinner had progressed, Damien's criticism of Elena's responses felt like ice water in her veins. "You seemed uncertain when discussing the financial aspects," he said, his tone remaining gentle, but carrying an undertone that made her stomach clench with unexpected anxiety. "Investors need confidence, not hesitation. We can't afford to appear amateur when millions of dollars are at stake." Elena's isolation from her American support system happened so gradually she barely noticed until the damage was complete. Her weekly video calls with her father became increasingly difficult to schedule around Damien's business dinners, charity events, and romantic surprises that seemed to coincide suspiciously often with her planned family conversations. When her college roommate Jennifer planned a visit to Dubai, Damien booked them a surprise weekend in London that same period, explaining that the timing was crucial for meeting European investors who were only available those specific dates. Elena's attempts to maintain friendships through social media and messaging became complicated by Dubai's different time zones and her increasingly packed schedule of professional and social obligations that Damien arranged without consulting her preferences. "You're building a new life here," he reminded her when she expressed frustration about missing important events in friends' lives. "You can't maintain the same connections when you're creating something revolutionary. Success requires sacrifice." The engagement happened during a charity gala for environmental causes that Damien had organized specifically to showcase their partnership to Dubai's social elite. Elena wore a custom-designed gown made from sustainable fabrics, while Damien delivered a speech about their shared commitment to healing the planet through innovative architecture. As 500 guests applauded their vision for the future, Damien dropped to one knee and produced a diamond ring, so large it felt more like a beautiful burden than a symbol of love. The proposal was filmed by professional photographers and immediately shared across social media platforms, generating thousands of congratulatory comments from strangers who admired their fairy tale romance. Elena's yes felt automatic, the expected response to a public gesture that had clearly been planned without her input, though the crowd's enthusiastic cheers drowned out the small voice in her head, questioning whether she felt ready for such a permanent commitment. That night, as she stared at the enormous ring catching moonlight from their penthouse windows, Elena called her father with news that should have filled her with joy, but instead left her feeling strangely hollow and displaced from her own life. The wedding planning revealed aspects of Damien's personality that Elena had never seen during their romantic courtship period, as his need for control emerged through seemingly reasonable suggestions about guest lists, venue choices, and ceremonial traditions. He explained that his family expected certain formalities that might seem foreign to American sensibilities, but were essential for maintaining their social position in Dubai's complex cultural hierarchy. Elena's modest guest list of 20 close family members and friends looked pathetic next to Damien's 300 business associates, family members, and social connections who required invitation out of professional necessity. "We're not just joining our lives," Damien explained when Elena questioned the elaborate scale he envisioned. "We're creating an international alliance that could influence environmental policy for decades. This wedding represents our commitment to changing the world together." As Elena signed contracts for flowers, catering, and entertainment that cost more than most people's houses, she found herself wondering when her simple desire to build sustainable homes had evolved into this overwhelming performance of wealth and influence that felt increasingly disconnected from her actual values and dreams. The wedding of Damien Al-Rashid and Elena Martinez dominated Dubai's social media for weeks, with professional photographers capturing every moment of what Arabian luxury magazine called the environmental power couple's fairy tale union. 500 guests filled the ballroom of the Emirates Palace, though Elena recognized fewer than 30 faces in the sea of wealth and influence that had gathered to witness their vows. Her small contingent of family and friends from America clustered together like refugees in a foreign land, overwhelmed by the opulence that Damien considered appropriate for their social debut as husband and wife. Professor Martinez watched his daughter with growing unease as she moved through the reception like a beautiful automaton, smiling for photographers while her eyes seemed distant and unfocused. During their brief, private moment together, he grasped her hands and whispered urgently, "Mija, it's not too late to change your mind about any of this." Elena squeezed his hands reassuringly, though her diamond-encrusted wedding bangles felt heavier than shackles around her wrists. The honeymoon had been postponed twice due to urgent business matters that required Damien's immediate attention, leaving Elena alone in their penthouse while he traveled to London and Singapore for investor meetings that couldn't wait. When he finally announced they would spend 2 weeks in Zanzibar at an exclusive resort he had personally selected, Elena felt a mixture of relief and apprehension that surprised her with its intensity. She had researched Zanzibar extensively during the delays, dreaming of pristine beaches and crystal-clear waters where they could finally reconnect away from Dubai's relentless social obligations and business pressures. The resort Damien chose was more isolated than anything Elena had considered, accessible only by private boat and catering to ultra-wealthy clients who valued absolute privacy above conventional luxury amenities. No distractions, no business calls, just us in paradise, Damien promised as they boarded his private jet, though Elena noticed he had packed multiple phones and seemed unusually tense despite his romantic declarations. The villa exceeded even Elena's elevated expectations, built on stilts extending over turquoise waters, so clear she could see tropical fish swimming beneath their private deck. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened completely to let ocean breezes flow through spaces furnished with sustainable materials and local artwork that celebrated Zanzibar's cultural heritage. For the first 2 days, Elena felt genuinely happy for the first time since moving to Dubai, as Damien seemed present and attentive in ways she had almost forgotten were possible. They snorkeled through coral gardens that took her breath away, dined on freshly caught seafood, while watching sunsets paint the sky in impossible shades of orange and pink, and made love with a passion that reminded Elena why she had fallen for this charming, complex man. Her Instagram filled with carefully composed photos that generated thousands of likes from followers who envied their apparent perfect happiness, though Elena found herself taking more pictures than she actually experienced moments of genuine joy. Everything changed on the third morning when Elena woke to find Damien hunched over his laptop, his face illuminated by the screen's cold blue light as he scrolled through financial documents with increasing agitation. The sustainable development project they had worked on together for months was failing catastrophically, with investors pulling funding after environmental impact studies revealed potential damage to protected coral reefs. Worse still, Elena discovered that Damien's entire business empire was leveraged to dangerous levels, with personal guarantees that would bankrupt him if the Zanzibar project collapsed completely. "You knew about the coral damage," she said quietly, reading over his shoulder despite his attempts to close the laptop. "The environmental assessments we submitted were falsified." His explanation came in angry bursts between frantic phone calls to Dubai, revealing a side of his personality that Elena had never witnessed during their careful courtship. The romantic, environmentally conscious developer she had fallen in love with dissolved before her eyes, replaced by a desperate man willing to destroy the very ecosystems they had promised to protect. The argument that followed shattered Elena's remaining illusions about their marriage and Damien's true character. He needed her signature on investment documents that would drag her father's university connections into the failing project, using Elena's reputation and family relationships as collateral for his financial survival. When she refused to participate in what amounted to environmental fraud, Damien's mask slipped completely, revealing the controlling manipulator who had orchestrated their entire relationship. "You're nothing without me," he snarled, his handsome features twisted with rage and desperation. A naive American girl playing with sustainable building blocks while real men make actual money. Elena packed her suitcase with trembling hands while Damien alternated between threats and pleading, promising to change while simultaneously detailing how thoroughly he had isolated her from any support system that might help her escape. As darkness fell over their paradise villa, Elena realized she was trapped on an isolated island with a man whose financial desperation had finally revealed the violence that had always lurked beneath his charming exterior, and her next decision would determine whether she would live to see another sunrise. Elena's attempt to leave the villa that night would be her last act of defiance against a man whose desperation had finally consumed whatever humanity remained beneath his charming facade. She waited until Damien's angry pacing finally stopped and his breathing deepened into what sounded like exhausted sleep, then crept toward the door with her packed suitcase and phone clutched in trembling hands. The wooden walkway connecting their villa to the main resort stretched before her like a bridge to freedom, moonlight casting silver patterns on the water below as she took her first careful steps toward escape. Behind her, she heard the creak of floorboards and knew with sickening certainty that Damien had been awake all along, waiting for exactly this moment to prove how completely he controlled every aspect of her existence. His voice, when he called her name, carried no anger now, just cold calculation that terrified her more than his earlier rage had done. The chase across Zanzibar's pristine beach became a nightmare choreographed by isolation and darkness, with Elena's designer sandals slipping in sand that felt like quicksand beneath her desperate sprint toward the main resort's distant lights. Damien pursued her with methodical patience, his longer stride and intimate knowledge of the resort's layout giving him advantages that Elena's terror couldn't overcome despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. When he finally caught her arm near a cluster of palm trees that blocked the view from any nearby villas, his grip felt like a steel trap closing around prey that had never really had a chance to escape. "You're not going anywhere until you sign those documents," he said conversationally, as if discussing dinner plans rather than holding his wife prisoner on a beach half a world away from anyone who might help her. Elena's scream for help echoed across the water before his hand covered her mouth with practiced efficiency. The violence that followed wasn't passionate or impulsive, but calculated and systematic, delivered by hands that had once caressed her with seeming tenderness, but now struck with precision designed to minimize evidence while maximizing damage. Elena fought with every ounce of strength her architect's training had given her, clawing and kicking while pleading desperately for the man she had married to remember their dreams of building a sustainable future together. But the person beating her to death on Zanzibar's white sand bore no resemblance to the charming environmentalist who had swept her off her feet in Miami, and her appeals to his better nature fell on ears that heard only the sound of his financial empire collapsing around him. When Elena's struggles finally weakened and her voice faded to whispers, Damien continued the assault with mechanical thoroughness until her body lay still beneath the palm trees that had once seemed like paradise. The cover-up began immediately as Damien dragged Elena's lifeless body toward the water's edge, carefully arranging the scene to suggest a tragic swimming accident rather than deliberate murder. He scattered her belongings to simulate someone who had gone for an impulsive midnight swim, then methodically removed any evidence that might contradict his planned story about a devoted husband searching frantically for his missing wife. The luxury villa's isolation gave him privacy to clean blood from his hands and clothing while rehearsing the devastated performance he would deliver when reporting Elena's disappearance to resort staff in the morning. As dawn approached over the Indian Ocean, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that Elena would never see again, Damien practiced his worried expressions in the bathroom mirror while her body lay hidden among beachside vegetation where he had dragged it after the tide refused to cooperate with his staging. Morning brought Damien stumbling toward the main resort with perfectly orchestrated panic, his hair disheveled and clothes rumpled to suggest a man who had spent hours searching desperately for his beloved wife. Resort staff immediately organized search parties while Damien provided tearful testimony about Elena's love of early morning swims and her tendency to take dangerous risks in unfamiliar waters. The performance convinced everyone except Ahmad Hassan, a local groundskeeper whose decades of experience with wealthy tourists had taught him to recognize the difference between genuine grief and calculated deception. When Ahmad discovered Elena's body partially concealed among dense vegetation nearly a mile from where Damien claimed she had gone swimming, the bruising around her neck and defensive wounds on her arms told a story that no amount of wealth or influence could rewrite. As Zanzibar police placed handcuffs around Damien's wrists while he protested his innocence, with increasingly desperate claims about diplomatic immunity and family connections, Ahmad quietly said a prayer for the young American woman whose dreams of building a better world had ended in violence on Paradise's darkest shore. The forensic evidence that destroyed Damien's carefully constructed lies emerged within hours of Elena's discovery, as Tanzanian investigators proved more thorough than the wealthy developer had anticipated from what he assumed would be a corrupt and easily manipulated local police force. Elena's lungs contained no water despite Damien's claims about a drowning accident, while the defensive wounds covering her arms and hands told the story of a desperate struggle against someone she had trusted completely. The pattern of bruising around her neck matched handprints rather than any injury that could result from waves or currents, and the location where her body was found made it impossible that she had washed ashore from the swimming area Damien had described. When forensic technicians recovered Elena's phone from the villa, deleted messages painted a devastating picture of her growing fear and desperation in the days before her death, including texts to her father warning him that something terrible might happen, and her final message to her college roommates stating, "If something happens to me, it was an accident." Professor Miguel Martinez arrived in Stone Town 3 days after his daughter's murder, his academic composure shattered by grief, but his determination to see justice done burning with intensity that surprised the local authorities and international diplomats who tried to manage his expectations about African legal systems. The mathematics professor who had spent his career solving abstract problems found himself navigating a very concrete battle against wealth and influence as Damien's family deployed expensive lawyers and diplomatic pressure to have the case transferred to UAE jurisdiction, where money could more easily purchase favorable outcomes. "My daughter believed she could change the world through architecture," Professor Martinez told the lead investigator, his voice steady despite tears streaming down his weathered face. "She won't have died meaninglessly if her story prevents other women from falling victim to men who see marriage as just another business transaction." His quiet persistence and the growing international media attention surrounding the case ultimately prevented the diplomatic maneuvering that might have allowed Damien to escape justice through political connections. The trial became a media sensation as journalists from around the world descended on Zanzibar to cover what newspapers called the Paradise murder that exposed the dark side of social media perfection. Elena's Instagram account, with its carefully curated images of luxury and romance, became evidence that prosecution used to demonstrate how dramatically social media presentations could differ from terrifying realities. Her final post from Zanzibar, showing sunset dinners and champagne toasts with captions about finding perfect happiness, were presented alongside the deleted text messages that revealed her fear and desperation during those same moments. The contrast between public facade and private terror resonated with women worldwide who recognized similar patterns in their own relationships, or those of friends and family members. Damien's defense team attempted to paint Elena as mentally unstable, claiming she had threatened suicide when he tried to end their relationship, but Elena's friends and colleagues testified about the confident, brilliant woman they had known before meeting Damien, and the gradual changes in her behavior after marriage that followed classic patterns of isolation and control. When Damien took the witness stand in his own defense, his initially composed testimony crumbled under cross-examination as prosecutors systematically exposed the financial desperation that had motivated Elena's murder. The $5 million life insurance policy taken out just weeks before their honeymoon, his company's massive debt and impending bankruptcy, his father's threats to disown him if he couldn't save the family business through Elena's American connections, all combined to create a motive that no amount of charm could disguise. The moment that sealed his conviction came when prosecutors asked about Elena's refusal to help save his failing business by fraudulently involving her father's university in environmentally destructive development projects. "She owed me everything," Damien shouted, his mask finally slipping completely as rage replaced his calculated grief performance. I gave her opportunities she never could have achieved alone. She would have been nothing without me. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours before finding him guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, while noting that wealth and connections could not purchase immunity from justice. 5 years later, the Elena Martinez Foundation operates women's shelters in 12 countries, helping victims of domestic violence escape abusive relationships before they escalate to murder. Professor Martinez makes an annual pilgrimage to the Zanzibar beach where his daughter died, now home to a marine sanctuary established in Elena's memory that protects the coral reefs she had dreamed of preserving through sustainable architecture. Her Instagram account remains active as a memorial, its perfect images now serving as a powerful warning about the difference between social media facades and dangerous realities. The Foundation's most successful program trains travel agents, hotel staff, and tourism workers to recognize signs of domestic violence among couples on vacation. Inspired by the resort employees who had heard Elena's screams, but dismissed them as passion rather than pleas for help. Elena's story has been shared by women's organizations worldwide as a cautionary tale about how quickly romance can become prison when controlling partners use isolation and financial dependence as weapons of abuse. In her final text message to her father, never sent but recovered from her phone's draft folder, Elena had written, "I thought love meant building something beautiful together, but some people only know how to destroy." Her words now appear on memorial plaques at domestic violence shelters across 3 continents, ensuring that her dream of creating positive change in the world survived even though she did not.